Price ceiling means the maximum price set by the government. Price floor means the minimum price that is set by the government. In the equilibrium price, there's not going to be an escalation or a de-escalation all factor altogether. It just keeps going around. When the supply of the labor increases, the equilibrium falls. When the demand of the labor increases, equilibrium price also rises. So price floor means that you will not be able to go down below this value at any given point of time. Good morning and welcome to the chapter 5 in microeconomics revision class in second PUC, where we are going to talk about the chapter the market equilibrium. In the previous chapters, in the previous sessions, we were discussing about the topics that are very important in terms of the microeconomics. This chapter also comes under the same category, but nevertheless, this chapter is very easy. Why? Because if you start going through the chapter summary, you will be able to understand and appreciate that this has got a lighter version of the chapter 4, a little bit enhanced with some new terms that we are going to learn for today. So starting with the equilibrium excess demand. So normally we all know about the factor called as excess demand, the demand functionality itself. Moment when I say equilibrium excess demand, so which means to say that above the demand that is expected, a demand which is way above that is being expected, that's where we call about the excess demand function altogether. Followed by, we are going to talk about excess supply. Similarly, when it is estimated above the expected supply, we are talking about the factor called as the excess supply coming into the picture. Why? Because whenever we talk about supply and demand, there is a number in the mind, there is an estimation in the mind. But when you're going to exceed it, we are going to talk about this excess supply and the excess demand function. Let's talk about marginal revenue labor of product, which is going to talk about the income that is going to be earned due to the production taken up by a labor here. So what is that extra income that is going to be earned by the production factors of labor here? Followed by value of that. Yes, of course, we are going to talk about the value of the labor, price ceiling and price floor. Two important concepts that you have to learn in this chapter. Price ceiling means the maximum price set by the government. Price floor means the minimum price that is set by the government. Followed by the perfect market competition, where there is an important function where we are trying to say where the buyers and the sellers are exactly matching. So that's what we are going to talk about, a perfect market competition here. Followed by demand and supply curve shift. So automatically when there is an excess demand, there's going to be a rightward shift. When there's an excess supply, similarly another rightward shift that we are going to talk about here. Followed by free entry and exit of firms, which means to say that in a perfect market, we believe that there are no barriers for the firm to come in and go out. The market is open. So moment you find that there is a chance to enter into the market, you are welcome. And the day when you feel that you cannot sustain the market, there are too many people already there, the competition is heating up, you have the rights to just walk out of the market. So on the whole, when you look into this particular chapter, it is quite interesting for all of us to know that there are so many new terms and terminologies where we are speaking about these concepts. Now, followed by, let's move on to the 1-mark question, starting with define the market equilibrium. A situation where for a particular good, supply is equal to demand. I want you to underline this ideology very, very clearly. Supply is equal to demand. That's what we are talking about this situation. Why? Because the moment you start seeing that somewhere supply has started matching equilibrium. So we all know that this is the supply curve and this is the demand curve. So let me just write it down for you. The demand curve here and this is the supply curve. So this is the point where it is matching. So I'm trying to arrive at an equilibrium position here. So this is very, very important for all of us to know. So that is what we call it as meeting of supply and demand curves. There is no tendency for the prices to change, which means very, very clear, obviously, on the factor that prices are not going to change, they're not going to escalate, they're not going to move up or down. So the prices remain same. This is a constant price scenario altogether. Followed by, what is an equilibrium price? The equilibrium price is the only price where the desires of consumers and the producers agree. So if I am a consumer and there is a producer available in the market, there is a point at which we meet, and that's exactly what I call as the equilibrium price. So this is the price that is acceptable for a consumer, and that is a price on which the producer also agrees. So finally you arrive at a consensus, and that consensus is what we call it as the equilibrium price. So in the equilibrium price, there's not going to be an escalation or a de-escalation all factor altogether. It just keeps going around. Now, the next thing is the price ceiling. As I've already told you, the maximum price that is set by a government for a product. Now, most of us would be knowing about this factor called as MRP, maximum retail price. Now, what is this all about? Why is there an MRP set by the government? The reason is quite simple. Why do we do this is because we tend to make people understand that this is the final price that is set by the government. Now, whenever I say the word maximum retail price, that means to say that the entire thing is held there. It has been kept as a factor there. So that is the maximum price on which you would be able to sell. You cannot sell more than that. So the government has already fixed the price. The government has already kept it in mind that this is going to be the final price tag that is available. Followed by, what is a price floor? Minimum price set up by the government for a product. So the lowest price that is being set up by the government is what we call it as a price floor. Now, why is this price floor coming in? Because there are certain times when people might involve themselves into black marketing of product, or people might tend to just cut down the competition by bringing down the price. So there are several ways to manipulate the market altogether. In order to stop all these functions, the government says very clearly that let me introduce a price floor. Now, what is a price floor? Exactly where government says that you cannot sell below this price. That's exactly where we bring in the price floor mechanism. So price floor means that you will not be able to go down below this value at any given point of time. So this makes the market more stable. So there is a lower price that has been fixed and an upper price that has been fixed. So let me put it as LP and UP, lower price and upper price. So the product can only shuffle between these levels altogether. Followed by 2 marks question, define equilibrium price and quantity. Now that is where I'm going to talk about goods supplied is equal to the quantity of goods demanded. Again, somewhere down the lane in this 2 marks question, I'm coming back to the point of supply and demand. So whenever people ask you equilibrium price and quantity, I always say that the point at which the supply and demand function is matching, that's where we are bringing the equilibrium concept. So this is exactly like a curve. If I put down here, for example, I would like to say that this is the demand curve, this is the supply curve. So the equilibrium point that we are talking about is the matching point altogether. Followed by, what is a marginal revenue product of labor? Look at the word itself. It is the additional amount of revenue that a firm can generate by hiring one additional employee. It is found that by multiplying the marginal product of labor factor by the price of the output. Now, what happens in industries these days is that they find that by adding on employees, you can also add on to the revenue. A very interesting concept. So every time when a company takes it on its objective that they want to add additional employees, so automatically what happens here is that it starts becoming higher and higher. So now what happens is that the value of the output also starts going up higher. So this is where we are bringing into the factor called as the concept of marginal revenue product of labor. So this is where you will be able to see that we are able to generate one more value by hiring one employee. So this becomes very, very important for all of us. So this is highly important there, where we start finding out that how people are able to generate this entire activity. Now, this is quite common in production companies. Why? Because more and more we tend to hire people. We tend to look into people as an asset factor altogether. You will be able to generate more income. Followed by the 2-mark question, the wage is determined in the labor market. How is the wage going to be determined? Now, whenever you go to the market, there is a value for a laborer. He might be a carpenter, he might be a plumber, he might be an electrician, he might be working into masonry work. Whatever is that, there is a value for the work that he produces. That is the value for the output that we are talking about. So how is the wage that is going to be determined? The wage rate is determined by the intersection of supply and demand of the labor. If the supply of labor is very high, then we cannot go on bargaining on the price. If the demand of the labor is very high, then automatically the value for that particular work will also start going up. So that's where I say, when the supply of the labor increases, the equilibrium falls. When the demand of the labor increases, equilibrium price also rises. So quite a interesting theory altogether here. So you will be able to see that next time when a person charges 500,000, 2,000, 3,000 or 800, whatever is the money for a day's labor work altogether, that's primarily why, because you understand the demand function and the supply function. So whenever the demand function for a particular labor starts going up, the upskill up for that particular level, automatically the prices will also go up. And when the supply is too much, then the value will start coming down. Now, let's move on to the 4-mark question. What is the implication of free entry and exit from the market equilibrium? Briefly explain on this. Now, we know that in a perfectly competitive market, there are equal number of buyers and equal number of sellers. No doubt about it. That's why we call this market as a perfect market altogether. So you don't have to worry about the marketing factor here at all. The number of firms here are fixed in nature. So they are operating in a short run. So which means to say that the intersection of supply demand comes into picture, and that's where we are going to determine the equilibrium value. Now, what is that we are trying to see here as a factor of free entry and free exit altogether? Moment a company decides that it wants to enter a market under perfect market theory, it is quite easy. Why? Because it just finds an entry into the market because it believes that there are some buyers available for its product. Similarly, when the company starts deciding that that's the end of their delivery, that's the end of the scenario altogether, suddenly they take an exit out of the firm. So this is what we exactly mean by saying about the free entry and free exit of the product. Now, what happens here is that new companies come in, new companies go out. So there is always a movement available. There's always a free space available for companies to come in and take an exit. In a normal scenario, this is not going to happen because even to enter into a market is very difficult. And similarly, if you want to just exit out of the space, that's also going to be a cost for you. So in a regular market condition, we cannot talk about the same scenario, which means to say on a realistic basis, this is not possible. But under a perfect market equilibrium, under a theoretical assumption, yes, there is always a free entry and free exit that has been shown altogether. Followed by, I'm just going to do one POQ question which is bound to come here. Let's try to solve this question here. That's quite interesting. So you're being given QD, which is equal to 200 minus P, and then you are being given QS, which is equal to 120 plus P. So what we are going to do here is that 200 minus P, I'm just going to equate demand versus supply. So I'm going to put it like this. Now, what happens here is that if I bring this here, 200 minus 120 minus P is equal to 0. So this will become 80 minus 2P, which is equal to 0. 80 is equal to 2P. P is equal to 80 divided by 2, which is equal to 40. So the price here is 40. So once you've got the value of P, you can substitute it in any one of the equation. Let's say we take it to the demand function itself. So QD is equal to 200 minus 40. So you know that the value here is 160. If you put it in the other equation, you will get the same value here. That is 120 plus 40, which is equal to 160. So both of them are matching. So we are reaching a perfect equilibrium. This is a very, very simple problem which you can solve in the examination, and this can fetch you a full 5 marks here. So please don't miss out on the problems. That's very, very important for all of you to have a look into it and solve the problem that has been given. With this, I come to the end of this particular session. I hope and believe that all the important concepts and the questions that have been discussed in this chapter will be of a great help and resource to you. In the upcoming section and in the upcoming class, we are going to talk about Unit 6. That's about the non-perfect markets, the monopoly and the other forms of it. But until then, stay tuned, stay blessed, and stay enlightened forever. Thank you once again for joining me today on this wonderful day.